In 2016, the world watched as one of the most feared figures in modern crime was led away in handcuffs, his empire collapsing behind him. For decades, he had been a ghost, vanishing through tunnels, slipping past soldiers, surviving betrayals and wars that reshaped a nation's darkest wounds. His name inspired fear across borders, yet his story began far from power, in the mountains where poverty carved harsh lessons into young lives. This is the journey of a man who rose from hunger to command a criminal empire that spanned continents, a man who became a symbol of both terror and corruption, shaping the drug trade in ways the world still feels today. To understand how he reached such heights, the story must return to the beginning, to the remote hills where Joaquín Guzmán first learned the meaning of survival. The story opens in a country shaped by conflict, where the line between power and survival has been blurred for generations. Mexico's struggle with the drug trade did not begin with one man or one organization. It grew from decades of instability, poverty, and political fractures. As institutions weakened, the drug economy filled the gaps, offering money where the state offered little, and protection where law enforcement could not reach. Entire regions became dependent on poppy fields and smuggling routes, while criminal groups evolved into powerful organizations capable of challenging the government itself. In this world, violence became a language spoken across borders. Cartels rose and fell, forming alliances that shifted like sand. Corruption reached deep into local offices and national structures, creating an environment where traffickers operated with near impunity. The international demand for narcotics fueled these networks, turning them into global enterprises. Communities lived under the shadow of fear, forced to adapt as criminal influence reshaped everyday life. By the late 20th century, this landscape had become a battleground of ambition, betrayal, and survival. And within this turmoil, a young man from the mountains of Sinaloa would rise. His story begins not with fame, but with the harsh reality of the land that shaped him, setting the stage for a transformation that would alter the course of the drug trade. Joaquín Guzmán was born on April 4, 1957, in the isolated village of La Tuna, deep in the mountains of Badiraguato, Sinaloa. Life in this region offered little comfort. The land was rugged, the opportunities scarce, and most families survived through hard labor. From an early age, he worked the fields alongside his relatives, learning the weight of poverty and the limits it placed on those who lived far from the reach of government support. Schooling was brief, and survival became his true education. His father's involvement in the cultivation of opium poppies and marijuana brought him into contact with the region's underground economy long before he understood its risks. As a boy, he carried crops through mountain trails, absorbing the unspoken rules that governed the area. Violence was never far away, and silence was often the only protection. The demands of rural life shaped him, teaching endurance and a growing desire to escape the confines of his environment. These early years forged a character marked by determination and hardened by necessity. The mountains taught him resilience, but they also exposed him to a world where illicit work provided the only path to advancement. This was the origin of a young man whose ambitions would soon outgrow the fields he once tended, guiding him toward a future shadowed by power and conflict. As Guzmán entered his late teens, the boundaries of his world began to shift. The fields of Sinaloa no longer felt like a place to remain, but a place to escape. The demand for narcotics was rising, and the networks that controlled their movement needed dependable hands. People who understood the terrain, respected the code of silence, and worked without hesitation. Guzmán fit this reality with unsettling ease. His reputation for reliability carried through the mountains, reaching the ears of traffickers who were expanding their influence across northern Mexico. His introduction into organized crime was not marked by ceremony but by opportunity. He began transporting shipments for regional figures who recognized his discipline and the calm manner in which he handled pressure. What started as small tasks quickly grew into responsibilities that carried greater risk. He arranged transport routes, ensured the steady flow of product, and enforced discipline when necessary. Each decision revealed an ambition that set him apart from others his age. The turning point came when powerful leaders within the trafficking world saw potential in him. They brought him deeper into their operations, trusting him with routes that stretched toward the border and with tasks that demanded unwavering loyalty. This moment changed his path permanently. He was no longer a laborer or a messenger. He had become a trusted operative in a growing criminal network. Yet behind this rise was a brewing tension. The established order of Mexico's drug landscape was about to fracture, creating openings that only the boldest would dare to seize. Guzmán was ready to step into that void. When the Guadalajara cartel dominated Mexico's drug landscape, its operations formed a vast network stretching from the Pacific coast to the US border. Guzmán entered this world quietly, but it did not take long for his presence to be felt. He observed everything: how shipments moved, how territory was managed, how leaders negotiated with officials and rivals. In a world defined by secrecy, he built his reputation through efficiency. Every task was completed on time, every problem handled without unnecessary noise. This discipline helped him rise through the lower ranks at a pace that drew attention. As internal tensions grew within the Guadalajara organization, so did the opportunities. When the cartel fractured after the downfall of its most powerful leaders, the once unified empire broke into competing groups. Routes were abandoned. Alliances collapsed, and regions fought to control the most profitable corridors. Where others saw chaos, Guzmán saw a blueprint for something larger. He understood that whoever controlled logistics, transportation, production, and distribution would eventually control the entire operation. He began building a system that was both bold and meticulous. Instead of relying on the old methods of transporting narcotics across open terrain, he introduced strategies that reshaped the trade. Tunnels became one of his most defining innovations. Hidden beneath border towns, these passages allowed shipments to cross with minimal detection. They were engineered with care, reinforced with wood or concrete, and designed to move large quantities quickly. This approach changed the balance of power. While rivals battled in the open, Guzmán expanded underground. The collapse of older cartels left a power vacuum, and Guzmán stepped into it with calculated precision. Together with other emerging leaders, he helped form what would become known as the Sinaloa Cartel, a loose alliance built on shared interests, strategic compromise, and ruthless pragmatism. Guzmán played a central role in this transformation. He managed transportation routes, negotiated with regional groups, and made decisions that shaped the cartel's expanding reach. His name carried weight not only in Sinaloa, but across multiple states, where trafficking routes allowed enormous profit. His rise was not without violence. The drug trade had always been built on competition, and Guzmán ensured that threats were eliminated swiftly. Rivals who attempted to disrupt shipments or challenge his authority faced consequences, yet his approach to violence was strategic rather than chaotic. While some groups relied on public brutality to intimidate their enemies, Guzmán preferred actions that reinforced control without drawing unnecessary attention. His strength lay not only in aggression, but in discipline, and that discipline became the backbone of Sinaloa's growing influence. By the early years of his leadership, his organization controlled major corridors into the United States, developed strong ties with suppliers in South America, and built distribution networks reaching cities far beyond the border. Corruption played a crucial role. Officials, police commanders, and local authorities were drawn into his orbit through money, pressure, or both. Every favor secured another route, every bribe secured another shipment. Bit by bit, the structure he managed became more organized, more efficient, and more difficult for authorities to dismantle. What truly separated him from others was his ability to think long-term. Markets shifted, alliances changed, and rival groups gained strength, but Guzmán adapted to each challenge. For every broken route, he opened two more. For every rival who emerged, he formed alliances that neutralized the threat. He understood that power depended not just on force, but on the ability to foresee danger before it arrived. By the time his name was known across continents, the transformation was complete. He had risen from a mountain village to the top of one of the world's most powerful criminal organizations. His influence spread through cities, borders, and governments. The rise was now undeniable. Yet with every step upward, the pressure around him tightened. The world had begun to take notice, and the conflicts that awaited him would shape the darkest chapter of his life. Guzmán's rise brought him into a new reality, one defined not by survival, but by dominance. As the Sinaloa cartel strengthened its grip, the landscape of Mexico shifted into one of the most violent periods in its modern history. His organization expanded rapidly, reaching deeper into the United States and extending its influence toward Central and South America. Entire supply chains were built around his decisions. He controlled production zones, border corridors, and urban distribution networks with a level of coordination that made his cartel one of the most formidable criminal structures of its time. But power in this world demanded constant battle. Rival organizations fought for territory, each seeking control of lucrative smuggling routes. These conflicts escalated into full-scale wars that devastated communities caught in the middle. Towns that once lived quietly became battlegrounds. Families were displaced, local businesses vanished, and ordinary people learned to move carefully through streets scarred by conflict. The violence was not random. It was a consequence of strategic moves, betrayals, and the relentless pursuit of dominance. The Sinaloa cartel enforced discipline with unwavering severity, ensuring that loyalty remained absolute. Guzmán's operations grew more complex as the profits increased. He oversaw large-scale trafficking networks that moved enormous quantities of narcotics across borders with remarkable efficiency. His organization incorporated sophisticated communication systems, secret routes through mountains and deserts, and teams that coordinated shipments with precision. Corruption became a cornerstone of his empire. Local officials, police forces, and even high-ranking authorities were drawn into his orbit, creating layers of protection that shielded him from arrest. Money flowed through these channels like a second currency, buying silence, cooperation, and time. Yet beneath this structure lay a darker truth. Communities paid the price for every gain. Entire regions lived under the fear of sudden conflict, and the presence of armed groups reshaped daily life. Schools closed, businesses fled, and families mourned losses that often went unreported. The weight of Guzmán's power extended far beyond smuggling routes. It reached into homes, neighborhoods, and the future of countless families. This chapter of his life was defined by both expansion and devastation. It marked the point where the impact of his decisions spread across borders, increasing international pressure to dismantle his network. Rivalries intensified during this period, pushing the Sinaloa cartel into some of its most brutal confrontations. Competing organizations launched attacks to seize territory, and Guzmán responded with force designed to protect his empire. These conflicts left lasting scars, transforming the national landscape. His control was vast, but every victory deepened the scrutiny from authorities both in Mexico and abroad. Reports exposed the scale of his operations. International agencies began forming coordinated efforts to capture him, and the pressure grew relentlessly. Even as danger closed in, Guzmán managed to evade capture time and again. His ability to disappear into remote regions, supported by loyal networks who warned him of approaching forces, strengthened his legend. Stories spread of tunnels beneath safe houses, hidden rooms and narrow escapes, stories that turned him into a mythical figure in some communities and a symbol of terror in others. At the height of his power, his influence reached from the smallest rural villages to major international cities. His name represented fear, wealth, and unchallenged dominance. But the same scale that made his organization unstoppable also made it impossible to hide forever. The world had begun to push back, and the walls around him were closing in. Every decision carried heavier consequences, and the forces gathering against him were no longer fragmented. They were united with a single goal. His peak would soon give way to the long fall that awaited him. As Guzmán's power reached its highest point, the forces determined to capture him grew more coordinated and relentless. What had once been scattered attempts by local authorities evolved into a unified pursuit involving national military units and international agencies. The walls that once protected him, corrupt officials, regional alliances, and remote hideouts, began to weaken under the weight of global attention. His organization still operated with strength, but pressure from rival groups and governments tightened around him. His first major arrest marked the beginning of a long and turbulent descent. Though he was confined, his influence did not disappear. Even behind bars, he maintained connections through loyal operatives, demonstrating how deeply rooted his control had become. But the confinement also exposed vulnerabilities within his circle. Alliances shifted, loyalties wavered, and the stability of his empire began to show cracks. The world no longer saw him as untouchable. Instead, he became the focus of intensified scrutiny. One of the defining moments of this chapter came with his dramatic escape, an event that drew global headlines. He slipped out through an intricate system designed with remarkable precision, proof that he still commanded loyalty and resources capable of defying state authority. The escape reignited his myth, but it also forced the government to respond with unprecedented determination. Military units were deployed, intelligence networks expanded, and international cooperation reached new levels. While he attempted to rebuild his inner circle, the environment had changed. Rivals sensed weakness and began challenging sections of his territory. Former allies negotiated with authorities or aligned themselves with competitors. The structures he had built with such discipline started to shift under external pressure and internal strain. Every move he made carried risks that grew heavier with time. The final phase of his downfall came when coordinated efforts closed in on him once again. No longer able to rely on the secrecy of mountain hideouts or the protection of compromised officials, he found himself trapped between relentless government pursuit and a destabilizing criminal landscape. He was eventually captured after a series of operations that involved both national and international forces working together. His fall symbolized not only the end of his personal freedom, but also a turning point in the long struggle between the Mexican state and the cartels. His capture marked the end of his reign, but not the end of the consequences his empire had created. As he was taken away for the last time, the world saw the closing of a chapter defined by power, conflict, and devastation. What awaited him next would not be another escape, but the beginning of a final judgment that would decide his fate permanently. After years of pursuit, shifting alliances, and escalating conflict, the final chapter of Guzmán's life as a free man began with his January 2017 extradition to the United States. This moment marked a decisive end to his long struggle to evade justice. Unlike previous arrests, there were no hidden tunnels, no loyal networks waiting to plan another escape. He was transferred into a system far beyond the reach of his influence, surrounded by security measures designed to prevent even the smallest chance of freedom. For the first time in decades, the man who once shaped entire regions found himself isolated, cut off from the world that had fueled his rise. His trial revealed the inner workings of the drug trade with unprecedented clarity. Witnesses described operations that spanned continents, routes that moved vast quantities of narcotics, and methods designed to outmaneuver authorities. The courtroom became a window into a world defined by secrecy and fear, exposing the scale of corruption and violence that had supported his empire. Each testimony traced the ripple effects of his decisions: communities uprooted, borders destabilized, institutions compromised. The trial was not just about one man. It was a portrait of an era shaped by the collision of crime, politics, and global demand. When the verdict arrived, it brought a sense of finality. He was sentenced to life in prison, a punishment that symbolized the collapse of a figure once believed to be untouchable. His transfer to a high-security facility represented the closing of a long and tumultuous saga. The mountains of Sinaloa, the corridors of tunnels, and the chaos of cartel wars were now replaced by the silence of a cell. His story, marked by power and destruction, had reached its irreversible conclusion. Yet his legacy extends far beyond the walls of any prison. The structures he helped build continued operating, reshaped by new leaders and shifting alliances. Communities still felt the consequences of the conflicts he fueled, and the myths surrounding his name continued to circulate in regions that once lived under his shadow. His life became a symbol of the rise of modern cartels, the failures of institutions, and the complexity of a struggle that crosses borders and generations. Even in confinement, the impact of his actions persists, reminding the world that the forces he once commanded did not vanish with his arrest. The story ends not with triumph or redemption, but with a sober recognition of the damage left behind. His journey, from a boy in the mountains to the leader of a vast criminal empire, stands as one of the most powerful and troubling narratives in the history of organized crime. And though his freedom ended in 2017, the echoes of his reign continue to influence the world far beyond the steel bars that now contain him.